It's great to see you, and welcome to the first video blog post, I guess, at Radix Ventures that we're doing.
Wonderful to be here with you, Paweł, and looking forward to a great conversation here on intellectual property strategy, startups, and the venture capital ecosystem as it's evolving every day.
Absolutely. DJ, we actually got to know each other at the probably world's biggest IP conference or technology transfer conference, right? And this was organized by Autumn, which stands for Association of University Technology Managers, if I remember correctly. And I remember I went to a class that you did, a workshop that you did on IP. It was, I think, on IP strategy / valuation considerations and so forth. You have since this must have been probably around 15 years ago, longer than I would like to admit. But I know that you've navigated basically the world, not in technology transfer. Since then, you've traveled to many geographies, many countries, and you've seen the technology transfer scene evolve. It even acquired a new name, right? It's now referred to as knowledge transfer more than tech transfer, correct?
Yes, indeed. And Paweł, it's been a while. Without dating ourselves, I think you and we met at the Autumn annual meeting, perhaps in 2011 or 12. And indeed, I was on the board, and I was given the opportunity of doing an IP valuation course. So very briefly, before we dive into all of this, my perspective about intellectual property and technology transfer is slightly different than most of the mainstream ways of thinking. I personally have been in the business of intellectual property monetization and valuation for now more than 2 decades. And you're right, I've had the fortune of working all the way from Japan on one side, India, and then several nations in Europe. Recently, I've been working very closely with Bulgaria, Poland, of course, because of you and a lot of my friends there. But indeed, the world has seen a seismic shift, I would say, in the process of technology transfer. It keeps on evolving. So happy to give my thoughts, Paweł, on the evolution as we see today. And it's very different, I must say, how it's perceived as knowledge transfer or valorization in Europe versus, the 3 phases of technology transfer in the US, where we come from tech transfer to technology development, all the way to now the 3.0, the technology commercialization stage.
Right. So we're going to talk about how IP matters to DeepTech startups, right? Because that's what Radix Ventures ultimately is about: investing in the most promising, most daring, most disruptive DeepTech startups. And it's tough to talk about it without mentioning IP. In fact, I think IP is often neglected in discussions about deep tech. I think it's pretty obvious to state that many of deep tech startups that have made it big have somehow been created as either spin-outs from universities or have been established by people with a former research background, right? It's I think widely accepted that that commercialization of research is one of the 3 primary functions of a university or an institute. But technology transfer itself has evolved, like you mentioned. So can you give us an overview from your perspective? What has actually changed in technology transfer over the last 2 decades or so? And specifically, what changes have you observed in Central and Eastern Europe?
Yeah, great points, Paweł. So, the technology transfer, I think, the fundamental shift that we see is it used to be very transactional. So, signifying, you have a technology at a university or academic research institution, and then you transfer that to the other side and magically something happens, right? It has not worked that way. So for the last, almost 46 years in the US, since the creation of the Bayh-Dole Act, which really, motivated technology transfer to start. Now technology transfer models are much more driven towards ecosystem building, product market fit. I mean, we've all gone through this, Eric Ries, Steve Blank model, and how that technology might be productized and how that actually fits the market. And I think there's been some really successful ecosystems in the recent past, such as Austin and Boulder, outside of just Silicon Valley and Cambridge. So really that signifies to the next level where, building a strategic IP portfolio early is really, really crucial for this technology transfer evolution. As you talked about, Central Eastern Europe and DeepTech companies, the interesting thing that we get to see is, develop an IP strategy before you need funding, right? So that's really, really crucial. And data actually shows, Paweł, that startups with approved patents are 59% more likely to raise venture capital funding. And the second is, these strategies allow the companies to get to a higher valuation. And I think as it comes to Central Eastern Europe specifically, I think the advantage that it has is, 10% of its graduates are in the, ICT sector, which is amazing, right? You see so many smart engineers come out, and yet it remains so capital efficient compared to Western Europe. So it's almost 40 to 60% lower cost if you build a startup in Central Eastern Europe. So no wonder, Radix and many of us other venture funds are looking at that great opportunity. And then, I would say we are in a very, very interesting time. The US is now creating an unprecedented opportunity, and I say that again, an opportunity for Europe-based deep tech startup development. And I think it sounds a little odd given kind of the tariffs and all the policy changes and things that's going on right now. But the fact is, a lot of these companies are now in Central Eastern Europe, hopefully are going to incubate and gestate in Europe before they jump to the US market. So I think that intentionally creates a great opportunity for Europe, Central Eastern European startups to sort of, maintain the startup for a longer period of time there, and perhaps even after a certain stage of maturity, which we'll definitely talk about, have the opportunity of growing in Europe. So I think that shifts the dynamic actually positively towards Europe. It might not seem like that today, but it surely is a great opportunity for Europe.
DJ, so if I were to paraphrase what you said and to make sure that I understand correctly your message, I think you're saying that, this traditional transactional approach to tech transfer, where it was basically looked at as a way of, fast, clean and fast, monetization of IP through licensing or, sale of patents. This approach did not work. It didn't yield the results that were expected. And I think it was discovered that to actually build value for a research organization, but also for all the other stakeholders around, research institutes or universities, you need a more comprehensive engagement with the ecosystem, right? You need to do a lot of entrepreneurial education. You need a lot of mentoring. You need venture building. You need, this consulting advisory around IP strategies. You need to facilitate non-dilutive funding to these teams before they actually become ready to be funded by VCs. And I think that's another thing that we've seen in at least in the US. I think you're also seeing it gradually in Europe, that the proportions between the technologies that are being commercialized through licensing and startups are shifting, right? I mean, whereas licensing used to be 80% of tech transfer, and startups only maybe up to 20%. Now I think it's more balanced. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, 100%. And Paweł, that's a great summary. You've been doing this, tech transfer business also, probably on the other side for a very long time. Yeah, I would say the fundamental shift that universities have had in the US in tech transfer is the following. Just licensing something, and I'll give you an example, a great example. Stanford licensed its technology to Google. The total amount of money that Stanford made from Google was $300 million, which might seem like a large amount of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's minuscule. And the fundamental reason for that is universities were licensing technologies too early. So discount was really, really high. As soon as they recognize that they can actually incubate those technologies at a higher technology readiness level, as we call it, the TRL, the better it is. And if you have a conduit through which you can transfer the technology to a startup, now that becomes a really valuable asset that a pharmaceutical company or a large company could come in and buy it out at a much, much higher valuation. So exactly like you said, Paweł, there's been an evolution, and I think the evolution has been because of the IP strategy, because of an increase in valuation, and that's the fundamental shift I think we see in the US. I'm sure you will probably see that in Europe as well.
Okay, and if I could, follow up on that and ask you, as both of us, we are working for a VC fund. What has been the role of venture capital in that evolution? And are VCs already involved to a large extent in these deep tech ecosystems around universities and institutes, or has that engagement just been starting recently? What have you observed? And you can also speak to your experience at Ohio State, right?
Yeah, so I'll speak very broadly about it. So right now, I mean, if you take a look at it, and I think I will talk about some critical ecosystem actions to be included, if I may. So in at least in the Central Eastern Europe region, what I see is the lack of growth stage funding capital. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of seed and pre-seed capital, and Radix is we are definitely one of those, and probably going all the way up to Series A. But Series B plus kind of capital is a bit lagging behind. So if you look at the numbers, the Central Eastern Europe region raised only about 510 million across 148 deals in Q3 of 2025. Now, again, from a number standpoint, that might seem large, but it's not really. So there's a heavy reliance on large late stage rounds, and that creates certain level of vulnerability in the VC market, right? And then, like we talked about, so I'm shifting a little bit here and there, but hopefully I'm answering all your points here. I think having an established technology transfer collaboration for funds in Central Eastern Europe is exactly the same as in the US. If you see, most of these funds actually evolve around an ecosystem, and what to me an ecosystem is really a cluster of universities. If you look at Cambridge, for example, I mean, there's not one, there's probably 5 institutions of world ranking, and technologies are coming out of that. And I think the same way, we can look at CEE to be evolving, and Radix, I think, is already doing that, right? We are collaborating with universities in the Warsaw ecosystem for sure, and probably in Cambridge as well. I see you coming to Cambridge many times, Paweł, so I see that collaboration growing. And look, I mean, if we can provide operational value exactly the point that you were trying to make, I think, is, if you look at, a Boulder or Austin, a lot of times, these VCs are actually providing value way beyond just the capital. And I think at Radix, we've taken that to our heart. And as you know, we have weekly meetings sometimes with our portfolio companies talking about IP strategy, commercialization strategy, regulatory strategy, which is so important, right, for some things like personal care, pharmaceuticals, biotech kind of technology, and then talent, network access. So I think that really fosters that ecosystem building, and I think VCs are a part of that ecosystem in the capital side of things, and that's what has defined successful ecosystems in the US. And I think I saw the news that Poland is now in the top 20 economies in the world. So I think Poland's doing pretty good.
Yes, we are doing quite well, but I think we have a way to go to catch up with with the US or Western Europe. I'm curious about the situation in the States, because I think shortly after I came for the first time to an autumn conference, I found out about Columbia University setting up its own venture capital. I think it was the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first university venture capital firm. And I know that this was also replicated in other places. Can you explain the logic? Why would a university set up its own sort of captive fund, and how has it worked so far?
Yeah, again, a very, very good question, Paweł. And so the universities coming into the VC mode is somewhat existential in a way, because a lot of universities were finding that other VCs would not come in and spend money in their startups if they didn't put their own money in, right? Mm-hmm. So now you see, I can't even count on hand how many universities now have their own funds. And I think it's a really great thing, because what they're doing is they're coming in even at a stage where, we call it the 3 Fs, the friends, family, and fool, who will invest in a startup at that very, very early stage, where it's almost like venture philanthropy, to be honest with you. It's a very high-risk startup at that point in time, and they're plugging in that money, including non-dilutive money, and then they come in and plug in their own early stage capital alongside other capital. So, and there's several, institutional funds who also come in at that stage. So I think universities figured out that if they invest money and it makes it big, if it becomes a unicorn, they are benefiting from that, even from a financial standpoint. So initially it started as an absolute need, because no one else was investing in them. And now it's become, why not? If you're making money, and I'll give you a great example, Cedars-Sinai Hospital, they invested in Prometheus, a personalized care medicine company, and that company exited to Merck for almost $11 billion. Cedars made about $1 billion from a single deal that they had invested into and had equity in that startup. So it's slowly but surely catching on to be the strategy for a lot of universities to actually, get a return on investment on their technology development.
Okay, thank you. Well, now moving on to the sort of startup side, I think what we are seeing, when we speak with DeepTech founders, is still quite often an attitude of looking at IP as a sort of necessary evil, right? I mean, you need to patent because it's appropriate. You need to patent to defend yourself, but ultimately it's a cost center. So I think that mindset is evolving, is changing. But how do you capture that value from IP, and what are the critical steps that you have to take to make sure that it's not just perceived as a cost?
Yeah, no, again, and again, we put startups in that group. In fact, mid-size, even large companies think of, IP as a cost center, unfortunately, but it's really a strategic tool. And I'll give you some numbers, because that's that's the space that I live in, valuation of intellectual property. Startups at the angel stage, investing stage, command a 93.2% higher valuation with angels. I'll repeat again. So more than 93% valuation if you have IP. At a later stage,
sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's a signal that you have something unique, right? That you have a technology moat.
That's 100%. And not only is it unique, by definition, intellectual property is unique. However, the important part is that it's unique and you protected it and you believe in the technology that nobody else can come in and knock it off, so to speak, right? So that's the thing that investors are looking for, risk mitigation. And I think what IP does is precisely that. It reduces the risk of that startup being quote unquote stolen from its own technology because it did not protect it, right? So, and it sort of resonates with later stage investors like us, for example. It's 51% higher value at a later stage. And get this, when you're looking at exits, almost 24% of the exits drive 78% of value, 3 times higher. So if you have IP protected versus no IP or just know-how or code, your valuation is lower, fundamentally lower. So I think that's one way to look at it, from why startups should be investing more time, strategy, and investment into IP, but also it's a critical mind shift change for them. For example, IP can actually drive licensing streams, which most startups don't think of. If their IP is properly protected, they could go out and license their own technology and continue to build their own product. It could drive partnership leverage. For example, if you are partnering with a larger company, is your IP protected? Or are they going to come in and take it away? If your IP is protected, you've got it covered.
Right. I want to stop here because we've seen it time and again, right? That if your IP is not really well protected, you're making yourself really vulnerable in these partnerships, right? And there is a lot of naivete among some founders in terms of going into these sort of partnership relationships like entirely blue-eyed and with hoping for the best, but sometimes being quite disillusioned very quickly, right? Because the business can be quite brutal in this in this space.
100%, Paweł. And since we are in the storytelling mode, I'll tell you 2 stories that really resonates with me, and I teach IP strategy course at Rutgers University. So we talk about when companies come in and they have all the funding in the world, they don't think IP is necessary. Case in point, Google and Facebook. Okay, when Google started, they did not think IP was important to them until the point they got sued on IP infringement almost every single day in a year. They had more than 350 cases filed against them. What did they do? They went in and bought a company, Motorola Mobility, for $12 billion to bring in IP that could give them coverage. So that was a reactive model as opposed to a proactive model. And the same thing was also true in case of Facebook. They had to go buy the AOL patents for $500 million, to protect themselves. So yes, absolutely. I think, the quicker corporations, startups, understand the importance of IP, I think the better it is. And I will say, there's an action item to be done for a startup, and it's easy. They should designate, in my opinion, a chief IP officer. I'm not saying hire a new person, but designate the chief technology officer or the chief innovation officer as also the SIPA. because that gives a sense of priority, and that also allows a convergence of the IP strategy with the technology and business strategy, which is probably the biggest challenge that startups face in terms of moving forward with their IP strategy.
Correct. I think you couldn't say it better. I think your IP strategy actually impacts so much on your business strategy, your sales strategy, even your team strategy, right? Because should you choose not to patent but protect everything as a trade secret, that imposes a very strict limit on a very strict sort of framework on how you manage people, the non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, non-competition clauses, and so forth, right? So that I think I couldn't agree with you more. One of the key people in the founding team has to accept that chief of intellectual property role. And what's if I may ask, what are the key questions that you have to ask yourself as a founder? I mean, let's say you're a founder, you're watching this video, and you realize, well, I haven't done too much on the IP side. I am a deep tech startup. Maybe I want to start. How do you start? What are the first steps that you take?
Yeah, and Paweł, I've almost made this into a formulaic way of looking at things because I've seen it so many times getting played out. So here are probably the 5 critical early stage mistakes that startups make. Okay, number 1, they give out the secret early. So meaning someone is so excited, they go and present, and there's a premature IP disclosure. Okay, they go to a conference and talk about things without having the right kind of confidentiality in place. So I think the number 1 mistake that we lot of times see is this premature IP disclosure. And if you do that, in the US, you have 12 months to still go back and file a patent. But if you made a public disclosure, it's gone. Rest of the world, including Europe. So it's very critical. So that's number 1. Number 2, a lot of times the assignments are not done properly. And it's a disaster because, maybe a technology is coming out of a university and perhaps one of the inventors did not assign that intellectual property properly to the university. And we have a case law. In fact, I would, highly recommend people to go take a look at the massive damage that the Stanford v. Roche case, sort of refers to, and effectively having the assignments done properly from inventors. Then the most critical thing in a patent, are the claims. And I will be honest with you, as a biophysical chemist who was doing his PhD, I did not know during my PhD how important claims were. And claims matter and how well they're written. And to be honest, the other thing that we're finding out, I'll digress a little bit, is the advent of artificial intelligence-based platforms that's come up. They're absolutely fantastic in one element, which is the searching for freedom to operate. What art lies out there, and to match your technology with the patent landscape. And if people are not doing that, it's not only you're missing out, you're making a fundamental mistake, right? So that's the third one. And then I think along with that, just doing a much more broader search outside of freedom to operate to kind of take a look at what's the white space. How can you make your IP more valuable so the value of your startup is actually additive with the IP value? And I think that's so critical. Again, AI comes in and helps a lot. And the last thing, which I think is probably the biggest mistake, is treat IP as a purely legal matter and then just hand it to your attorneys and say, go write a patent. That is an absolute wrong strategy by far, because IP is a strategic asset. It should have input from the business side, the product development people, the CEO, CTO. A lot of times what you find is, they don't really participate in the process. That should be the last thing a company does. you should have the business and the product strategy drive the IP strategy. So I think those are probably the five mistakes that we see. And, again, preventing, core things like stop the IP loss, go and file a disclosure with the company and file a patent. And again, I understand startups will come back and say, okay, it's expensive. Actually, it's not. You can file a provisional patent for less than $200 US, no matter where in the world you are, and have a year's worth of protection. And so there's strategies, Paweł, that they can probably follow that would drive down the cost, and at the same time, not have the cardinal mistake of losing out on the IP. So I think those are probably a few things that I would probably mention for a startup founder, to focus on.
So now let's try to rephrase it for into the first 5 steps that you have to take, right? So the first thing is to take stock of what has been disclosed already, and be honest with yourself and with your co-founders, and then hopefully that's not all of your technology. And then for what has not been disclosed, you have to understand. You have to make a decision of whether you want to patent it or not, right? And we'll get to this question in a moment, because I think it's also important. You do not have to patent all the time, but should you decide to patent, then the second step is to formulate your claims, right? And that has to be done with a professional in the room, with a patent attorney, but you cannot leave it to them. You have to participate, and you have to make sure that your claims are as strong as possible, as wide as possible, because that drives the value, right? Patents with weak claims, narrow claims have little or no value. And then once this is done, what is the next step?
Yeah, and I think having a sync between the business strategy and product strategy and the IP, it's a constant flow. It's not a one-time thing. So you constantly do it. And as a startup, I think it's very important, and we'll talk about this, the trade secret versus the patent strategy side of things. That's important, right? So what do you patent and what do you intentionally don't patent? There should be no subset of technologies that you have not thought about from an IP strategy standpoint. That is what brings disaster. So I think all of these are actionable as long as you have the IP strategy sort of constantly, in sync with your go-to-market, product strategy, business strategy, all of that stuff, right? So
yeah, I think it's a great point, because some people look at patenting as a sort of purely technical and legal process, while it's really about business and strategy. If you have to have your vision about how is this product going to be placed in the markets, right? What industries will it be applied in? Because that will influence how you write your claims. You have to think of alternative ways of doing the same thing, and you may want to decide of whether you include them immediately in the patent, if possible, if you have the supporting facts and evidence, or you deliberately withhold this information, right? So it's really there's a lot of imagination, creativity, and vision involved. So I think we got the first 3 steps, which I think should be sufficient. And then yes, we come to this important question: when you should not patent. Let me ask it directly, right?
Yeah.
What can be the important considerations that drive you to a decision not to patent?
Yeah, and that's a very timely question, Paweł. Because both you and I are in the business of deep tech investments, and no one can avoid artificial intelligence today, right? I mean, so that's sort of the AI meets deep tech kind of thing. So look, I think the fundamental thing for a lot of folks to can understand is data is not patentable, right? And that's such an important aspect of any deep tech or AI company. And it's dynamic from the standpoint of, it's based on the TRL and, like I explained, the technology readiness level, what stage are you at also drives what you should be patenting and what you should not. And I'll be very, very specific. So as algorithms evolve rapidly, your data sets are evolving as well. But that's not something that you're thinking about patenting. In fact, you should not, right? For many reasons. Another thing to keep in mind is you have a process or a method. I would argue that one should not patent a process or a method unless that is so obvious to the other side that they can reverse engineer. So now we come to the magic phrase, reverse engineering. Anything that you see that is a customer-facing innovation layer, and that can be taken and reverse engineered, you absolutely must patent it. There's no doubts about it, right? But the seminality of that invention also drives whether you're going to spend money in patenting that or not. So, data, don't patent. Algorithm, you can't patent. Process and method, you can patent, but you shouldn't waste your money doing so unless it's so obvious that it can be reverse engineered. Anything hardware related that can be reverse engineered, you should patent, you must patent, right? So I think keeping those things in mind, and look, it's an evolving world with AI. We don't even know how it's going to transform things in 2 to 3 years' time. The other thing also to consider is the geography where you're going to be playing, right? So if you have a US-based aspiration or company or product, you can very easily patent trade secrets under the United States, Trade Secrets Act. Okay, it's a great place to go and have, the trade secret not only protected, but also if there's a misappropriation of the trade secret, you have a recourse. I wouldn't imagine one would have the same strategy in China or India.
Yeah.
Once the cat's out of the bag, it's very hard to get that cat back into that bag, so to speak, right? So, you have to be very, very careful with your geographic considerations of trade secret versus patents. So I think those are probably the key factors that one should consider in terms of, their patenting strategy versus trade secret strategy, so to speak.
Right. I think another is the ease of detection of the infringement, right? And whether you can actually detect your technology being copied or not.
Exactly.
If you can, then obviously the patent makes sense because you can point to evidence that your IP has been infringed upon. If not, maybe you're better off holding the technology to yourself. And what I also hear is examples of companies where tech development is moving so fast that it just makes no sense. Your advantage is in the speed of movement rather than an IP protection. Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that. And the classic example is if you're building an app, and look, I mean, I might not totally understand the market. There are billion-dollar apps. And look, they're not protecting their IP. It's just the speed of market, right? So speed to market, I should say, rather, right? So yeah, I agree with you entirely, Paweł.
Okay, so let's wrap up perhaps with a question to you. How do you look at the CE landscape, and what do you see looking ahead as the sort of biggest opportunities and perhaps also some threats for deep tech founders in our region?
Yeah, so we live in interesting times. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So I would start with what's probably in everyone's mind. The U.S. retrenchment and creating an imperative for European kind of economies at this point in time. And what I mean by that is there's a huge shift in strategy in the U.S. Take the example of the clean tech and decarbonization kind of technologies, right? I think that creates a huge opportunity again for European companies. The 15% baseline tariff, which has been going up and down and changing, almost seems like on a weekly or monthly basis, that also probably creates certain anxiety in the short term for European, deep tech startups. But I think that allows for a higher level investment, for example, AI-driven GDP growth in the CEE. There's a tremendous amount of investment that's coming in. And I think that's a good thing. There's a massive investment commitment in the energy sector. Generally speaking, European countries becoming much more open to receiving people from other countries. Look, and that's what has really built in my mind Silicon Valley. More than 50% of the startups created in Silicon Valley have at least one co-founder who is of foreign origin. That tells us something, right? And I think that is also probably somewhat of a wake-up call for Europe and as well as for the US as we're looking at things. I think there's tremendous opportunities for Europe in areas like quantum, nuclear fusion, advanced materials. Europe is doing very well in those areas, and I would be remiss if I were not to mention how Ukraine suddenly shifted the dynamic with now a new war going on, how their technology is being sought after by the large nations around the globe. So look, I think the focus that Radix has towards defense and dual use, I think is brilliant. And I think that should be the strategy, looking forward, what are the sectors that are going to resonate and probably not being, looked at so closely by the US anymore, right? I think there's a big gap that could be filled. So again, I think in the short term, it seems a bit painful. But as we all know, no pain, no gain, right? So I think Europe is probably stepping up to the plate. And I think, again, you have to imagine this. And a lot of times, we don't understand this. Europe is not a country. CEE is not a country. You have an ensemble of thousands of years of culture, language, and all those differences, and you come together. But in the US, we are one country, right? So things are a little easier from that standpoint. So I think there's, again, I'm rambling a little bit, but the fact of the matter is in the short, near term, I think there are lots of advantages that Europe actually holds, especially the deep tech, which, by the way, a normal unicorn takes about 8 years. A deep tech takes only 6 years to get to be a unicorn. So there's a reason why we like deep tech as an investment strategy. So I think those would be my sort of comments for the near and intermediate future, Paweł.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think among the best known brains, geniuses coming out of the CEE region are people like Nikola Tesla, originally from Serbia or Croatia, depending on who you ask. Maria Curie, of course, Skłodowska, coming from Poland. You have John von Neumann, obviously from Hungary, a brilliant mathematician. All of them made their careers abroad, right? Perhaps I think we are in an age where they have more chances of actually making it big in their home countries, and let's hope that this will actually happen in the coming years. and hopefully, Radix will be able to contribute to that as well. DJ, before we conclude, let me ask you the final question, because I think the United States still remain the ultimate market, right, for many startups, including deep tech startups. If you make it there, you can make it anywhere. That kind of thinking. It's a huge market. It's highly advanced, and we see more and more deep tech startups from Europe, which have already incubated and grown to a certain level, built a certain scale, also eyeing the United States market. And whereas if you have an app, you can scale instantly from any place in the world without even moving from your home. But for deep tech, I think it takes more effort, right? You may need connections with not just your clients, but also potentially other research, other researchers. You may need to embed yourself in a given ecosystem much more. So what would be your guidance to deep tech startups founders from Europe who wish to establish a presence in the US?
Excellent question, Paweł. So I would say, moving to the US is not a knee-jerk reaction. You need a strategy, 18 to 24 months before you move to the US, have that strategy in place. So number one, have a US Delaware C Corp set up. That signals to the world, to the US, that you're serious about things. Number two, European senior executives, as smart as they are, they can't replace the strategy of having someone in the US, placed in the US, like a chief revenue officer or a VP of sales, some position like that, they have to have embedded in the US, right? And then, number three, I mean, just sort of, having a tie-in with the ecosystem. And like I mentioned, you and Paweł, I know you visited Connecticut and saw some amazing infrastructure there at UConn. You visited MIT. I've been connecting with, Boulder and Austin. I think having a tie-in with the ecosystem in a meaningful way ahead of time is so critical for the company to make that jump if that's what they're looking for. It's never going to happen where you are so successful in Poland or Bulgaria or Romania that you are just going into New York NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange and just going public. It just is not going to happen. So I think having a very deliberate strategy to get into the US ahead of time is critically important. And I think just having that laid out helps to implement it.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks for your thoughts and inspirations today. So let's work together at Radix, and so hopefully help some deep tech startups from across our region make it really big, and also focusing on IP strategy sufficiently. Thank you, DJ.
Go Radix.
Great conversation. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.